So, well, I was brought up by women in a way. My mum and dad broke up when I was little, and so I was always aware, so I had an older sister and brought up by my mum. And I was always, I suppose, aware of some of the struggles that they faced, and quite close to my mum and my sister. And then as I sort of started to grow up and develop relationships and things, I felt that this issue kept coming up again and again. And, violence against women had quite an impact in my life. And I heard of the White Ribbon campaign actually ages ago, a couple of decades ago or something. Probably not quite as much as that. One of my first involvements was messaging a load of mates on Facebook, say, sign up to the White Ribbon promise. And one by one messaging people saying, can you sign up? Thinking, this is an amazing thing. Of course, any bloke would sign up. The promise to stand up against violence against women. I think it even goes as far, or it did at that time, not to commit violence against women, which seems a no-brainer. And actually, quite a lot of blokes ignored it, just didn't get replies. And some blokes, quite, and my background's the charity sector, so I know quite liberal people, and some blokes just objected and so I don't need to sign up to this. And if you've got no intention and no history of violence against women, you probably don't. I'd like to think, in a way, I don't. The promise isn't going to make a difference, but it's about standing up. It's about recognizing actually how much violence there is in our society committed by men, and saying this is completely unacceptable. So that's how I got involved, and then I've come back to it again and again, and ended up meeting you guys and trying to move the conversation forward.
Excellent. Ross?
Yeah, and I think for me, it's that it's the format of being in Nottingham like we have been for the previous years. Unfortunately, this year from behind the camera instead, but it's that aspect of really having that conversation in public. And as you said, Jonny, what really resonated there with me was when you said to actually to get out there and to really make that challenge. And the conversations in Nottingham city centre where people like you said, Jonny, people have ignored us or been so confused as to why we're doing this, and for me that just proves why it's so important that we do, and we have to keep getting that message out there through the campaign year on year, because it's and the statistics are still absolutely atrocious, that 1 in 4 women are going to be subjected to domestic violence at any time in their lives as well. And that's for that statistic means that it is important, and we have to keep working on this campaign year on year.
Excellent. Okay, I mean, for me, somebody asked me the other day, when did you start all this concern about violence against women? And I was trying to think back to when I first sort of would have described myself as a feminist, and I couldn't really. And I suppose, like Jonny, I think some of it for me was family. I grew up in a very respectful, very stable family where my dad and mum got on very well, very respectful. I had an older sister. But when I first started having a concern about, I suppose, gender inequality was the first thing, before it was around sort of violence or domestic abuse, just gender inequality. And I can't remember when I became aware of it, but I suppose at a fairly early age, maybe in my teens. So I've always grown up with an understanding and awareness of gender inequality. And then it was the 16 Days of Action, which starts next Friday, which actually starts on White Ribbon Day. Starts with the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, ends on Human Rights Day. So that's the 16 Days of Action. And I came across that, I think, on the internet. You come across many things, and that just chimed with me, the need to take action against violence against women. And I started looking into how big the problem was. That then led to my involvement with Equation, because I did a sponsored run to raise some money for an international women's organisation. but I became aware of equation through doing that. And then I did some work for Equation and still do as a freelance facilitator. And it was through Equation that I became aware of White Ribbon Day. And I suppose the rest, as I say, is history. You know, we've done the thing in Nottingham City for the last 2-3 years where we give out white ribbons. And this year we're trying to do the virtual thing, the social media and all of that, which is not the same. I mean, you know, you sort of say it's not the same as trying to engage with men directly. But yeah, the white ribbon for me, it's like Jonny says, I suppose, it's drawing a line in the sand, whatever the analogy is, isn't it? It's just something where you can say, I am standing up, I am trying to do something, I am at least, you know, putting my marker down that I'm a man that would never, ever commit violence against women, but I can stand up and talk to other men about that and try and change the whole picture. So that's my involvement, I guess. Why is it important for men to be allies in the fight against violence against women in the struggle? Why does it matter that men get involved in this? Why don't we just leave it to the women to do it for themselves? So
for me, it's a sense of duty. You know, I mean, I try. I sort of see the world as you know, and I see life as involving opportunities to make choices about how you live. And you know, the principles are important to me, and I think this is something that is completely in the gift of men to choose to you know, women. There's an extent to which they can say, look, don't commit a violence against us, but that sort of demand requires more. It requires men to go, yeah, we will commit to not commit violence against you. You know, the responsibility is on us at the end of the day, you know, in terms of, you know, women and girls, people affected by these issues, of course, need support to stand up and tell the story. But it does come down to, you know, men, in terms of men committing violence against women, of saying, like, well, we'll take responsibility for it, you know. And I'm aware of a sense of brotherhood, you know, a sense of community with other men, and that there's a power in that, you know, society works in that we look to each other and look to people similar to us to say, what should I be doing? So, you know, if you look to other men and you don't find them saying, you know, you shouldn't be hitting your wife or girlfriend, you shouldn't be assaulting women in the street or in clubs, or, you know, the whole thing fails. It's moral duty.
yeah,
Absolutely. And if I could chip in there as well, I think it's we need to get that education out from for young people as well, you know, immediately in that conversation. And education for me at school was completely absent as well. And the more that we get that understanding across from an early age as well, then hopefully we can foster that sort of that ally aspect to it, and also to, you know, from a young age to understand that that a key part of challenging the patriarchy is committing to never being violent towards women and girls. And as I said, I don't think that's currently in the education system to be able to make that absolutely crystal clear. And so I think that's absolutely crucial now that we again, being part of this campaign to contribute to that educating ourselves continuously and other men as well, to challenge that culture, and to redefine what masculinity is really.
I mean, that point about young people, I think, is interesting, because going into schools with Equation, particularly into secondary school, which, I mean, you would hope, you know, 2020 things have moved on a bit. And I'm constantly surprised by the attitudes of young men. Not all young men. I mean, it is still a minority, thank goodness, just as it is a minority of men that commit violence against women. It's a minority of young men, but there are still some dreadfully sexist attitudes out there, and young men who think that it's okay, not necessarily to commit serious violence against women, but certainly think it's still okay to tell sexist jokes. It's still okay that your girlfriend should give you the password to her Facebook, or give you the password to her phone, or your girlfriend should do what you tell her to do, or wear what you want to tell her to wear. There are still boys, younger boys, who believe that, and I think that is quite worrying. So I suppose for me, the male bit is two things. One is role modelling, is showing younger men a role model of how to behave against around women or towards women, and why some of the ways they behave is not okay. And I mean, I've got two sons, so obviously I try to do that with them. But I think there's a role for all of us as a role model for younger men. But also, coming back to Jonny's point, I suppose, is that brotherhood thing. I think we can say things to men that women can't say. We can appreciate as men some of that history and some of the things I'm sure we've seen, maybe got involved with when we were younger, when you go out with a gang of men and you're in town and you've had a few drinks and you're shouting the road at a bunch of women. All those things we've perhaps experienced, or maybe haven't, but perhaps can identify with, understand, and have that conversation with men about it's not okay, and why that is the one end of a continuum that leads to the top end into violence and rape and sexual assault and all those things that and I think that's men are in a place where we can have that conversation with other men that women aren't able to have, and in places. And I think that a thing that Jonny's said a number of times is about where men are, like in football matches and in men's clubs and rugby clubs and places where again, where as men we probably have better access to those places and can have those conversations, we hope, in a way that women perhaps would find far more difficult or far more intimidating if they had access at all.
Yeah. Why do you think people object to this message? I mean, well, like when we've been out on the streets, just simply saying something about let's campaign to stop violence against women, and you get lots of people who are massively supportive, including lots of women who really enjoy seeing their boyfriend taking a leaflet. But then you do get, you'll have experienced, I know we have, blokes who are really rude and aggressive towards us.
Sometimes with their partners with them at that time as well, which is the most shocking aspect of that, isn't it?
But I wonder whether that, from somebody else's point of view, whether there is a reasonable objection, whether they see the world in a way that, that it is unreasonable to interfere in somebody's life and how they deal with their relationships.
I think we still have a macho culture as well, don't we? I mean, coming back to what I said about young people, I mean, there's still some very, I was going to say traditional, it's wrong that those attitudes should be, but there's still a lot of men who see that as weakness. They would see getting involved in a conversation against violence, about violence against women as some sort of weakness, some sort of challenge to their manhood. Again, it's the toxic masculinity thing, isn't it, that we've talked about lots of times. It somehow challenges their sense of self as a man. If they have to start considering women, it's almost like they shouldn't have to do that.
The thing is, like, that thing about toxic masculinity, I think you've got to be careful to say, we're not saying masculinity is toxic.
No.
Because like in my relationships, there's real value in my masculinity, and some of that like corny masculinity, of like putting my arms around my girlfriend and being strong and stable and, doing DIY, which maybe they're social constructs, maybe there's another world is possible, but actually you've got to live with the way the world really is, at the moment. And And I love celebrating those things, and I love being somebody who's quite physical and, you know, does weights and, well, not much in lockdown, but does some weights and goes out on my bike and stuff like that.
Yeah, there is a certain, it's like walking on eggshells, isn't it? This whole notion of what is masculinity. And it's funny you mentioned DIY, because one of the things in the Great Project with Equation, when we go through a quiz with the kids and we ask them who should do, it's about gender role models or gender models, and it's about who should do certain things in the house. And one of them is who should do the DIY. And it's amazing how many kids still say the man. And I mean, the point we make is that, yeah, it can be the man, but it could easily be the woman. A lot of women certainly better at DIY than I am, because I'm rubbish at it. But we, you know, that whole thing. But again, it's not wrong. And as you say, masculinity is not wrong. There's nothing wrong with masculinity. We are men at the end of the day. And we've got to be careful, I think, as well, to keep saying we're talking about a minority of men that commit violence against women. But there is, you know, we keep talking about this continuum, which I think is important to me, in that at one end there is, you know, domestic abuse and rape and sexual assault, and at the other end is, you know, joining in with the sexist jokes that you make down the pub, and not one. It isn't that one necessarily leads to the other. It's just a continuum along which I think as men we have to say, where am I on that? Obviously, none of us are at the top end. We would never do that. Are we at the bottom end? You know, have we laughed along with our mates in the pub when they told a sexist joke or whatever? And I think for me, it's a questioning. And you're right, Jonny. I mean, there is nothing wrong with masculinity per se, and we've got to be careful about, you know, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying all men are bad. And that's not a message I know any of us want to give, but it's about questioning our role, isn't it?
I think there, Jeff, as well, is that, you know, that spectrum of what is normalized as okay. And we need to push that spectrum, you know, and push what is acceptable far beyond, because if a sexist joke is acceptable, then, you know, and then in town, sort of, you know, inappropriate touching becomes acceptable, and then, you know, what is normalized it keeps, you know, our boundaries keep changing, whereas we need to push back against that to ensure that we can challenge that from the start, really. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. Yeah, and I think I suppose that's the thing, what is acceptable, and if you spoke to 100 men, they will all have a different idea about what's acceptable and what's normal and what's okay, and I suppose that's what we're trying to challenge or question. I mean, sometimes it's about questioning and having a conversation, isn't it? It's not always about challenging and telling people that they're wrong. It's about questioning and having that conversation about where people think they are, which hopefully will change attitudes.
And our knowledge and our experiences will never be complete as well. You know, we're not on here to say that we are 100% right and us three are the experts on this. We're not at all, but we want to encourage more people in all different sort of neighborhoods and communities to also have that conversation. I think you're right. That's why role models and sort of the male allies are going to be important, because we need other people in neighborhoods and communities to stand up and to take that pledge, wear that white ribbon. So therefore, it's not just going to be a select sort of group of people with knowledge and experiences, but we're able to open conversations. And I think that's what the White Ribbon campaign and Equation are intending to do, aren't they? It is opening conversations, not closing any. And I think that's really important that we get that across as well.
How can we do it better? I mean, I'd like to think, again, without being self-congratulatory, and as you just said, you know, we're not experts. Hopefully we're doing what we can as individuals. How can we do it better? You know, as individuals or as men, you know, how do men do it better? I don't know who's thoughts on that.
Part of it is it's not just about telling others, you know, it's about yourself, and you know, like not I mean, like you said, Jeff, we'd never do like the extreme things, and I really hope I never would. But part of this conversation for me is about being able to like check my own behaviour. But you know, like it just makes you recognise that life isn't always easy. Relationships aren't always easy, and you part of this sort of trying to like have this awareness of yourself and your masculinity, but just whoever you are, you know, maybe it helps you sort of think through some of the challenges and look for better ways of dealing with conflicts, or just dealing with your own frustrations and, you know, your own, you know, not insecurities, your own unpredictability, almost your own moods, your own anxieties and bad tempers and all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And we, you know, I think the typical education is that you know, the home life and is all sort of behind closed doors, and unfortunately, I think in the UK in the last sort of 30-40 years, this idea of community has sort of deteriorated, hasn't it? And you know, we know less about our neighbours, we're sort of and we're less trusting and less sort of knowledgeable really about who's on our streets, and you know, who has what skills and what not. And I think really it's about you know, it's about opening up what all of us in life have, and that's relationships with anybody, and not assuming that has to stay behind closed doors. We need these conversations about what makes you know, good relationships, and we need to have that public. I don't think it should be taboo, which I think it has, and to that end, what is acceptable has shifted towards some sort of really extreme and horrific statistics, which we're with today with regards to gender-based violence towards women and girls. So I think that's part of the strength of this campaign as well.
I suppose that's one thing that, like Jonny says, that lockdown has shown us that we've been inside people's houses more, haven't we, than ever, or we've talked about what's going on in people's houses, and we know the statistics. You know, 2 women a week killed all through the year by a male partner or ex-partner. We know that's gone up in lockdown, up to 5, I think, at one point. You know, we know that calls to domestic violence helplines have gone up by 25%. We know that there's a lot more domestic abuse going on because people are trapped inside. But that in itself gives everybody, well, hopefully anybody that is willing to sort of take on the statistics, a better idea about what's happening inside some families that perhaps people didn't realise before. Perhaps there is an awareness now. And again, you know, with the health warning, I suppose always that, you know, it's still a small proportion, but it's too big a proportion, because whatever proportion it is too big. The fact that it's happening anywhere to one woman is too much. So it's about people knowing that, isn't it? But I think for me as well, and Jonny said it, and we've all said it, you know, over our lime and soda in the past, is about individual action and individual responsibility. I mean, I'm older than you two, but I mean, I still question almost every day how I am relating to women, even just in the street. You know, the fact that if it's dark at night and I'm walking behind a woman, I will now cross the road, so I don't feel like I'm intimidating her. You know, I will take actions I wouldn't take probably even 5 years ago. You know, to try to ensure whenever I can that there is no way my individual behaviour is impacted negatively on a woman. And I can't claim that I'm perfect, of course I'm not. But it is about that individual action and trying to make sure that nothing I do is going to have a negative impact on a woman. And the plus side is, I suppose, is exactly what we're doing today, and what we do, getting involved in White Ribbon, is to spread that message, I suppose, and as well as looking at ourselves, to look at what we can do to bring other men along with us, I suppose, to have the conversation.
I think, yeah. So, like, I also want to make the point, just because I said I would, and it's because it's something I'm really aware of, is that one of the objections men watching this will make, it might well be, well, hang on, let's be fair. Women commit violence against men, domestic violence and sexual violence, and men suffer these things too. And it is true. And it's a sort of challenge for me. So my job's running the Male Survivors Partnership nationally. So I'm like massively aware of those issues. And I work with the people who are running policy for Rape Crisis England and Wales, who work with lots of women and girls who are affected by sexual violence. And I just want to say that it isn't a case of like some sort of conflict around, oh, hang on, let's be fair for men too. The appropriate response isn't to say, oh, you know, it's not fair to talk about women and violence against women and girls because men get affected too. Yes, men get affected too, and male victims should be stood up for and receive the same support that women and girls do. And also, we should be doing work to prevent violence against men. The work that we're doing on White Ribbon and asking other men to do is part of a wider thing about violence in society and against vulnerable people, and a wider thing about how we act together, you know, what we do together. I think there's been, you know, to round it up for me, like with the COVID thing, there's got to be massive learning this year about our societies work by saying we need to establish some rules for ourselves, and we need to understand our impact on each other. And some people fight against that and they say, oh, it doesn't exist, you know, or it's not my problem, I'm going to be all right, or it's all right to do, oh, don't be silly, you know, I should be free to do what I want. You know, they're like not necessarily reasonable objections, because if you want the security of living in society, you've got to try and work out some rules. And what we're trying to do, I think, is to say to the people in general, but guys in particular at the moment, to address the biggest problem that we seem to face, by, you know, setting some rules for yourself, you know.
I think you're right. I mean, one of the messages we give with equation in schools, because we sometimes get asked the question, what about men that get abused by women? And what we always say is, yes, men do get abused by women. We know it happens. It also happens in same-sex relationships, and we shouldn't ignore that either. But the reason we talk about violence against women and girls is because it's a bigger problem. We just make it less important. It just makes it bigger in quantitative terms. That's.
And in the bigger picture, it exists within a patriarchal system as well. And so this commitment, signing up to the White Ribbon Pledge, is just one thing that we can do to try and push back against that patriarchal system which we are living in as well.
Yeah, and that's where it starts getting difficult for lots of men, isn't it? Is that we all know that and acknowledge that. When you start talking about the patriarchy and that, you know, men have more power in society, in every aspect of society, than women do, that's where men get a little bit nervous, I think, and start seeing some of their security threatened. And in lots of cases, for a lot of men, their very identity as a man is being threatened as soon as you start saying that. The motivator for domestic abuse and violence against women is men wanting power. You know, people talk about rape as if it's about sex. I mean, no, rape isn't about sex. It's about power. And a lot of men I mean, we don't, you know, that's why we're here, because I suppose if we did, we wouldn't be here today. But a lot of men feel their very identity is threatened when you start talking about things like male power and patriarchy and things. And so, yeah, and I suppose, again, for me, in White Ribbon or in anything, it's about trying to meet men where they're at, isn't it? Because for every man you can have a proper conversation with about the wider patriarchy and male power and masculinity, there is another man who just wants to know why he should hit his girlfriend and why it's wrong. And there's that whole meeting men where they're at and being able to relate to men. And coming back to where we started, I think, is why White Ribbon is important, why it's important for men to talk to men, to have that conversation, hopefully at a level that other men can engage positively with, rather than, as we see, or as we have seen in town on a White Ribbon night, they, you know, push past you and go away and go, I'm not interested in that because of whatever.
And there's a lot of focus these days on what makes a good employer, and a lot of that is about employee well-being and people feeling that they can that their workplace respects their views and opinions. And so for employers to sign up to this and to get that message across, I think is a really good responsibility for workplaces to make that commitment, make that stand, and really ensure that they're broadening their understanding of what employee well-being is going to look like.
Ross, what do you think? Do you think things are changing? Do you have an impression of things changing in terms of younger generation of workforce having different expectations? Because, you know, like we've talked about people's resistance to this message, and it's like something I see through work as a cause of like not understanding violence against men, sexual violence against men. It's part of the problem of like society not wanting to see it, and people not wanting to recognise the whole thing around men and sexual violence, whether as victims or perpetrators, I think, and domestic violence. You know, just it's like something we don't want to talk about. But I'm hoping that there's sort of a change in gender attitudes in the younger workforce.
Yeah, definitely. And I hope with the power of social media, sort of this year through the White Ribbon campaign, we can capitalise on that and tap into that younger generation who are wanting to be educated and are wanting to challenge their privileges and their previous understandings of that. And are things changing? I think I think yes, in the sense that there is a greater acceptance of that, you know, violence towards women and girls is not acceptable. But I think also it's that subtle form of everyday sexism as well, which still is so prevalent that needs to be challenged. And as I've said, you know, that everyday sexism can become something else, and all of a sudden we're perpetuating those statistics of gender-based violence. And so we need to pushing ourselves and our understanding of this issue, and keep talking and keep listening to one another, because otherwise what is normal and acceptable will prevail, and people will get hurt, and women and girls will get hurt, and that's obviously what we're here to stand up against today, and to say is never ever acceptable.
6 years ago, so these things come up on Facebook and go, "You did this 6 years ago. Do you want to tell everybody about it again?" And you go, "No, of course I don't." It was a fringe event I organised for the Nottingham Women's Conference. I'm not sure it happens anymore, but it was organised by Sonia. Do you remember Sonia? And I organised an event called "Why All Men Should Be Feminists." And my thought when I saw that 6 years ago is has anything changed? I mean, the point of men was the point of what we're doing now, is saying, you know, men should be more considerate of women's issues around, you know, gender inequality, and particularly, you know, gender-based abuse and violence. And so, you know, the title was meant to stimulate some discussion and I suppose be a bit controversial. Why should all men be feminists? But and again, I think that's a difficult thing, isn't it? I mean, I would happily, you know, without any embarrassment, describe myself as a feminist. I think a lot of men would struggle with that term. And that, again, I suppose for me, the point I'm making is about changing the conversation, or adapting the conversation, excuse me, to whoever you're talking about. Because I know even a lot of my friends who I consider to be quite liberal would still balk at being described as a feminist, because to them that is something that only women can be. But it was just strange that it came up this morning, you know, on Facebook, just a minute before I sort of took my laptop to do this. So, yeah, I don't know whether I hope things are. I mean, it's just coming back to Jonny's point, which you answered very well, Ross. Is are things changing? You know, for the younger workforce, are things changing anywhere? Hopefully, they are.
And I think that the other thing is that we need to get away from being comfortable in conversations that we have, and we need to deal with uncomfortable truths in order to move forward. And I think that's again a great thing about the White Ribbon campaign. And in previous years in Nottingham, it has been a challenge to go up to men and to promote the White Ribbon, but it's pushing through what is usually uncomfortable in order to drive that progress and that change that we need. And I hope as well that that's something that you'll be doing in the work in schools as well, is encouraging, having conversations which aren't easy. A lot of it happens behind closed doors, but they're necessary, uncomfortable conversations to have to make the world a fairer, better place.